Hello and welcome to another gameplay commentary video for GiantSlayerTV. Today I'll be watching a game from the perspective of Faye on patch 12.8. The game was played on the second day of the patch and is in the Masters Diamond MMR bracket. As usual, our goal today is to take a look at the defining moments that make up a game, where improvements can be made, and to highlight good decision making. In this game, we'll see Faye utilize the Ardent Sensor augment and a well-done mid-game pivot that secures her a top 4. In the late game, we'll see where being inflexible can cause problems and discuss the merits of rolling on 8 versus leveling to 9. All that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT shows and tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. To begin with, let's talk about Faye's game plan and component priority at the start of the game. The latest TFT patch 12.8 was rather small in terms of overall balance adjustments. That means the meta will stay roughly the same as before, meaning there's no need to go into the patch trying to discover new compositions to play. This helps a lot at the beginning of a patch, and for Faye, she's keeping the goal simple: play AD Flex. AD Flex can be a whole bunch of different compositions, but it usually means playing between Sivir, Kha'zix, or some type of backline carry like Jhin, Draven, or Jace. In terms of the patch itself, Sivir was mostly untouched, though Scrap Striker did get nerfed slightly. Kha'zix took a sizable nerf to his ability scaling, and 2 of the mutant mutations were slightly nerfed. Everything else was essentially untouched by this patch. Sivir is still likely to be the strongest option and is a good default composition to aim for. For item priority, it's all about swords, bows, and gloves when playing AD Flex. Sivir uses a lot of bows, so that's the ideal starting component, but having a sword or glove opening is perfectly fine, which we will see when Faye ends up having a sword. At the end of the day, the exact opening component you get won't make a huge difference, so don't worry about it too much. Let's set aside the game plan as we hit our first major decision of the game, the 1-4 augment. With a 2-sword opener, Faye doesn't have anything great to slam, which naturally puts her board at a disadvantage to try and win streak with. She can shore up this problem by taking Luden's Echo, as it provides a decent amount of early game power. But the problem with that augment is a lack of units that cast often, so it may not get much value before getting outscaled. Item Grab Bag is always a solid option, especially with an opening that lacks an item to slam. It's a roll of the dice whether or not the item will be useful, but it's definitely the safest option of the 3. Ardent Sensor, on the other hand, has great scaling potential but low early game impact. It is already under the impression that going on a win streak is unlikely to happen, so Luden's Echo is off the table. In the end, she chooses Ardent Sensor, which, as mentioned, won't do a whole lot for her board in the early game. This choice would have been a lot better had she had components to slam a Locket, as the combination of Locket and Ardent is amazing, especially early game. Overall, there really wasn't a wrong decision, as all 3 options were good. Faye's choice mostly plays for the mid game more so than the early game. Before the next major moment of the game, really quick, let's talk about the choice to grab a glove and slam Infinity Edge. Infinity Edge is a risky item to slam because it can struggle to do damage against early Bramble boards, and without Last Whisper later on, it can be a bit of a dead item at times. Despite those shortcomings, it's worth making in cases like this one, where Faye has no other option as the preferred component bow was already taken. Point being, don't be afraid to take a subpar option if it gives your board immediate value. We've arrived at the defining moment of the game for Faye. Sure, the Ardent Augment choice was quite important and certainly plays a role in the game, but this moment where Faye pivots to an early Kha'zix is what sets the tone for the rest of the game. Not only that, but slamming both Bloodthirster and RFC to ensure Kha'zix pops off as much as possible is what puts Faye on the path to top 4ing. These types of decisions can be risky, but seeing them pay off should help in future games when similar situations arise. Don't be afraid to take a gamble if you're confident knowing you can capitalize on a decision. From one moment to the next, the 3-3 augment is here. It's a silver tier augment, meaning it's not likely to have a huge impact on the rest of stage 3. That being said, 4 score is the most likely to swing Faye's board if she high rolls like crazy and hits 2 Kha'zix from the orb. But that's unlikely to happen, so what's the most practical option here? Blue Battery is okay, but not amazing, and can cause Kha'zix to jump around too often. Disintegrator is useful, but at tier 1 it's not a lot of extra damage. It really does only leave Faye with 4 score as the best all-around option, even though it's only 12 gold. Had Faye been in a position without a 3-item Kha'zix, then Disintegrator or Blue Battery were definitely better options. Given she has the Kha'zix and needs gold, 4 score is the way to go. Just another example of where following a guide isn't always the best option, as most of the time taking an econ trade on 3-3 is a big no-no, which is not the case here. We can skip ahead quite a bit as the rest of stage 3 and early into stage 4 goes well for Faye. As it turns out, transitioning into a 3-item Kha'zix is quite good for stabilizing a board. Now is the time for Faye to decide whether rolling additional gold is worth it to find a faster Kha'zix 2 or to aim for level 8. Either choice can be seen as correct, though sacking health is always a risk. In the end, the decision Faye goes with is to trade health for a faster level 8. And just a few short rounds later, it's leveling time. Main goal is to find Kha'zix 2 and a frontline. Potential transition should also be considered because Kha'zix is not a good scaling carry. It's worth noting that this game is a non-standard composition for Faye. Ardent Enchanters with mutantless Kha'zix is definitely weird to see, but it goes to show that the meta is still favored towards playing Flex. Overall, rolling on 8 was mildly successful. Faye now has Orianna 2, found an Echo, and hit Kha'zix 2. By no means the strongest board in the game, but definitely stable enough to begin looking towards a transition. Final augment round here, and it's gold this time. Disintegrator shows up again, but this time, being tier 2, it's far more appealing than before. Knowing what weaknesses your board has is the easiest way to make a decision for the final augment of the game. In this game, Faye has alright burst damage with Kha'zix, but lacks sustained damage. And there's no real secondary damage dealer, as most of her additional damage comes from random casts of abilities. Disintegrator is likely the best option here and is where Faye makes a mistake. She ends up taking Thrill, which by no means is a bad augment. With Enchanters and a Bloodthirster, she really doesn't need additional sustain. She needs extra damage, and only Disintegrator provides that. The component Grab Bag is also an option since Faye is lacking frontline items, but it doesn't add extra damage. At the end of the day, Thrill is always a safe option, but again, we want to point out that it's important to take stock of what your board needs, not so much what is considered good by default. Really quickly, let's touch on making a Locket this late into the game. Normally, this wouldn't be a great usage of components, but specific to this game, it's a good decision because Ardent Sensor is immediately applied with the Locket shield. Knowing little tricks like this is always a useful tool to have in your back pocket. Alright, it's the late game. What can Faye do to improve her board? Either rolling on 8 to potentially find a transition or aim for Kha'zix 3. The other option is a level towards 9. Stage 5 has gone alright so far, and 31 health means Faye can survive a few losses, but at the moment her board is not strong enough to get more than the 4th place finish. Sometimes it's okay to take 4th and move on into the next game. After all, 4th does gain LP. Taking a risk and leveling can be far more helpful for learning, and ultimately is the decision she makes. One of the final decisions of the game is leveling to 9. Level 9 can often be what wins the game for some players, but it can also be a curse as it's not uncommon to level up and make no major improvements. This is what ends up happening to Faye even though she had a decent amount of gold to spend. That's just the risk the players take when they level to 9, especially near the end of the game when on low health. Ideally, Faye could have hit a better carry and a few 5 costs. This doesn't mean it was wrong to level to 9, by the way. The moment to highlight here is that most plays have inherent risk to them, and sometimes they don't pay off. The final round of the game for Faye is a tragic one because she did hit a champion to transition into, Jace. Granted, she hits the Jace 2 at the end of the round, so we can't fault her too much for not making the switch, but there was a transition available. This goes to show how easily it is to fall into a sense of complacency with a board. Faye knows that Kha'zix doesn't scale well without specific mutations, but still chose to stick with him into the late game. Even though her items aren't great, she does have the Ardent buff, a well-rounded board, and Socialite to put the carry on. Jinx or Jace were both perfectly viable options. Heck, even Zeri would have been alright. As he transferred the items over to the Jace in the end, she may have won the final round and secured a 3rd or higher. Let's now reflect on what this game showcased. The initial decision to play Ardent Sensor meant Faye was aiming towards the mid-game power spike, which she followed up on with a pivot into a 3-item Kha'zix. That decision alone is what ultimately led her to being able to top 4 because it saved a lot of health and helped build her economy. Not every game is decided by one decision like that, but there are plenty of times where, yes, one defining moment can easily earn you a top 4. Another part of this game was the willingness to play a non-standard composition. Ardent Sensor with Kha'zix carry is definitely going to be rarely played, but it put Faye into a position to hit a lot of easy upgrades and gave her a good mid-game power spike. It may be uncomfortable to play outside of the standard meta, but flex play can be both rewarding and fun to play. We can stop there and say good job to Faye, but it's important to know where more could have been done. In this specific game, the mistakes mostly came at the end where Faye stuck with a Kha'zix carry far too long, even though she knows it wouldn't scale well. Being aware of your board's limitations is all well and good, but to elevate a game like this from a 4th to a 3rd or higher, it's crucial to be more decisive. All in all, take the dub where you can, but always look back on a game to see where improvements could have been made. That's all for today, folks, but let us know in the comment section below what you'd like to see in our next gameplay commentary video. Thank you for watching. If you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Future Giant Slayer TFT videos.